There are some schools on the West Coast right now, Matt. And again, this is USC football talk first and foremost, folks. So leave the comments and questions. We'll get to them, but we're going to move on to realignment and we'll circle back with USC talk as you guys ultimately produce the show. There are schools looking for life preservers right now. Of course, USC and UCLA were basically given a yacht back when they jumped about a year ago now. So what we know is that Colorado's moved on to the Big 12. What we know is that there are rumors, and we'll focus on the Pac-12 side of it, that Washington and Oregon, who have applied last fall to the Big Ten and been vetted and cleared, and there's much speculation and as to exactly what that means, but that they are close to going to the Big Ten. So now we've got schools like Utah, Stanford, and Cal that are hanging out there, but seem to have some options based on a number of components to their football brand and their academics that make them attractive. And then, of course, there's Washington State and there's Oregon State that really seem to be clinging to a couple threads.
Yeah, so this is going to be fascinating, and let's just start with the point that, all right, the Pac-12 is apparently going to announce a TV deal, or at least it's going to announce the details of a TV deal, at some point in the next 48 hours. We're recording this Monday night. If you're watching on Tuesday, we're doing this Monday night, so sometime Tuesday or Wednesday. That's what John Canzano reported earlier on Monday, that apparently we might finally have some white smoke coming from the Vatican in terms of a Pac-12 TV deal. But the whispers going around is that figure is going to be pretty low, like around $20 million per school. And I've been saying that, if it's like 6-7 million less, if it's like 24-25 million, that's going to keep the Pac-12, or at least at this point, the Pac-9 together. Like, you're not leaving for the Big 12 over 6 or 7 million. But if we get into double digits, if we get into 11 and then 12, 15, like that really would undermine confidence. I offer no predictions on this, but just let's if you haven't been following this story the whole way, and I know some of you have, but not all of you. So just to make sure for everyone watching here that, let's remember, the Pac-12 could have had San Diego State and SMU on June 30. All right. It could have had San Diego State for $17.5 million less in exit and penalty fees than what it has right now on the night of July 31st. If maybe you're watching this on Tuesday, August 1st, Wednesday, August 2nd. Why would you not secure San Diego State for that much, much lower exit penalty fee, which you can much more easily cover? You can much more easily usher in San Diego State to your conference. And of course, San Diego State, let's briefly exclude SMU from this. If you just bring in San Diego State, that's Colorado insurance. If you bring in San Diego State on or by June 30, that's Colorado insurance. That Colorado was the most obvious potential flight risk. So San Diego State means you have 10 schools for 2024 if Colorado gets uneasy and bolts. And maybe the very fact that you have San Diego State in the fold secured would itself be a deterrent to having Colorado leave. That itself might make Colorado think the conference has more stability. And then if you bring in San Diego State at the reduced exit penalty fee, you make it easier for San Diego State to leave the Mountain West and join the Pac-12. You bring in San Diego State, then you bring in SMU, and you get that Dallas market. And let's realize, Deion Sanders has been a fan of the Big 12 and of taking Colorado to the Big 12 because he wants to recruit in Texas. And so, did it occur to the Pac-12? Did it occur to George Kliavkoff? Oh, Deion Sanders wants to recruit in Texas. I better bring SMU into the fold to give Colorado a nice little carrot as a disincentive to leave, as an incentive to stay. Like, do these guys know how to play chess? Do these guys know how to plot 2-3 moves ahead? Just absolutely no awareness in the room. And so bringing it back to the present moment. So maybe the Pac-12 at the 11th hour still has a plan to bring aboard San Diego State. But if it does, like, this is not the way you would go about it, right? You should bring aboard San Diego State when it would have cost the Aztecs and you a lot less to do so, right? I mean, it's just so simple. It's just so nakedly apparent in every way. And so if the Pac-12 does indeed put forth a media deal on August 1st, it's just going to magnify the reality that why couldn't you have done this on June 30? Or even more modestly, why couldn't you have done this on July 21st, Pac-12 Media Day? It's a week and a half, and this is a recurring thing that I've mentioned. If you could do it on X day, on a specific day, what is it about an extra 3 weeks or an extra 10 days or an extra month that was so somehow prohibitive that you couldn't do it at the slightly earlier point? Because let's remember, this has been negotiated for several months. This has been talked about for several months. The idea that, we're going to do this on August 1st, but we couldn't have done it on July 21st. No, sir. And we couldn't have done it on June 30th. That's the thing that absolutely kills me. And what I have realized in terms of thinking about this, reflecting on it, just trying to somehow make sense of it, I think what it really gets down to, in addition to the Pac-12 just being incompetent, like we all know that, but what I think it really gets down to is George Kliavkoff had this plan, right? He had this layout. He had this architecture. Grant of rights first, media deals second, expansion third. That was his plan. That was his structure. That's how he was going to do it. And we encounter lots of situations in life where our best laid plans and the way we've mapped everything out, like we've thought about this for months, this is our strategic play, and by golly, we're going to stick to it. Sometimes in life, you have this great architecture, you have this great structure for how you want to do things and how you feel is the correct thing, and that's fine as far as it goes. But sometimes the flow of events, the specific pressures, specific forces in the moment, leaders need to realize when the specific forces override your long established plan, your ideal structure, the way you had wanted to go about this thing all along. And I think ultimately George Kliavkoff was so locked into this plan, grant of rights, media deal, then expansion. 1, 2, 3. Expansion is third in our plan, in our line of operation. He was so wedded to that plan, and he just apparently is one of those guys who wants to stick to his plan, and he didn't have the flexibility, the agility, the acuity to adjust. And I think we can all see that. And I think that might really get to the heart of why the Pac-12 is potentially on its deathbed right now. Kliavkoff didn't realize that when San Diego State sent that letter to the Mountain West on June 13th, his plan, grant of rights first, media deal second, expansion third, he had to blow it up. He had to adjust. He had to bring aboard San Diego State, maybe also SMU, but definitely San Diego State. Needed to get San Diego State aboard in that moment. And one of the things that Tony Altomore has been talking about in recent days, and he's absolutely right, we are so far past the time for talking or messaging, or inspiring or convincing. No, act, get something done. That's the only thing that commands respect. And of course, it might be too late, but Kliavkoff didn't realize soon enough that action, getting something done, getting a deal done, getting San Diego State into the Pac-12 conference, that was going to create so much more respect than keeping this low profile and not promising too much and being mature and not being bombastic. He got locked into, kind of the vibe that he was creating and not trying to overpromise. He didn't realize getting something done is what was going to impress everyone at the table, was going to impress everyone in the Pac-12 community. He just didn't realize that, and he remained locked into that grant of rights first, media deal second, expansion third. He needed to elevate expansion when San Diego State sent that letter. He didn't do it, and here we are. So I don't have really strong predictions for what's going to happen in the next 48 hours, but it sure looks very ominous for the Pac-12. I'll say that much.
Here's the deal with building a plan. If you're organizing your living room or you're building a deck, then there are not other factors out there except maybe the weather. But you can build your deck because you can go step by step by step by step and do it. We're talking about a plan that involves components that you can't control. Working with media partners. What are other conferences? What are going to do? What are the institutions outside the conference going to do? What are institutions inside your conference going to? So everyone knows that to have a plan is great to have a plan, but you better anticipate that the plan is not going to go as planned. Hopefully, some of it will, but you have to anticipate. And even if you can't anticipate everything, you should be able to anticipate a lot of what's happened here and have a counter punch.
No question.
So
and
that's
I
what's
compare
happening.
this.
Yeah.
I compare this to coaching, right? If it's rainy, you need to have some towels on your sideline, or you need to run the ball more, or you need to do things, relative to the elements. Like, you can't be calling long downfield passes in rainy conditions. You need to work the short game a little more. Like, you always have to adjust to various conditions and factors. And if you're not, you're not setting yourself up to win. And it's the same in negotiations. And Tony Siracusa made this in our Pac-12 Media Day review show on July 21st, the night of Pac-12 Media Day. He said, the longer negotiations go on, no, that's not better. The longer a negotiation goes on, the more there can be an 11th hour snag. Hello, Colorado. The more there can be someone who gets impatient, or another plot twist enters the fray, or another conference pounces. That's just never, well, I wouldn't say never. It's very, very rarely the right negotiating tack, to let things go on. And the other thing is, and I said this on your special call-in show this past Friday night, is that this was about survival, not supremacy. Like, that's been a theme of mine. Survival, not supremacy, was always the focus for this media rights deal, for this particular point in the Pac-12's existence. This was not like a rainmaker deal. This was not about, hitting a grand slam. This was about just staying alive and then living until the next media rights round in 2030, 2031. You're just trying to establish a foundation for the next several years. This was not about being competitive with the Big Ten. It was not about, crushing the Big 12, doing better than Brett Yormark. No, I mean, Brett Yormark did a fantastic job to get the deal he got. And if people in the Pac-12 were thinking, oh, we have to match the Big 12 deal, as opposed to, let's come in at like 27, 28 million with San Diego State, with SMU, like, that would have been fine. That definitely would not have led to an exodus. The member schools, Colorado included, they would have been absolutely fine with that. And I sure get the impression that expectations were inflated, and that's why they were waiting for a moonshot style deal. That's why they refused to settle and get to the negotiating table and finalize something. Just the political calculus and how various poker chips were and weren't put on the middle of the table just seems totally out of whack with reality. That it was all about survival, not supremacy. And when you're thinking about survival, you're not thinking about the best outcome. You're thinking about avoiding the worst outcome. That was the goal. And what we've seen from the Pac-12 does not reflect the urgency one would and should associate with avoiding the worst outcome. The Pac-12 has not behaved like a conference which is trying to make sure it avoids the worst possible scenarios. And that's another obvious failing both of George Kliavkoff and the Pac-12 CEO group, the presidents and chancellors.
Basically, George Klyavkov inherited let's say, what once was $100 stock. And when he inherited it, it was an $80 stock. And then, based on all the information out there, all the pundits, people like ourselves and others that are even closer connected, all of that, the analytics should have told him, okay, this was an $80 stock when I got it. It once was a $100 stock. Okay, now it's, if I get 60 for it, I should be happy with that. Cut my losses. And shoot, I've been there. When you see the stock go down and down and down and down, you're holding and holding and thinking, it'll come back, it'll come back, it'll come back. No, no, no. It just keeps going down and down and down. And then you find yourself selling it for $35 when you could have had it for $80 or 60 or somewhere earlier, but you just kept hoping for the best and waiting and waiting and waiting when all the analytics, everything was telling you, get out, cut your losses right now, get a deal done.
There's no question about it. So as we turn to what's going to happen, people obviously are interested in how everything's going to go down. So, I mean, the first point is, if the University of Arizona and Robert Robbins leaves, then the next point goes to, will Arizona State and Utah follow Arizona out the door? Like, I think that Arizona seems to be the hinge point here. And then does Arizona lead to the collapse? Does Arizona lead to the death of the Pac-12 as we know it? And so if Arizona State and Utah join the Arizona Wildcats and form a 16-team Big 12, then what that means is, first, yeah, Pac-12 is probably going to die, but it also means if the Pac-12 dies, I think the other really huge story that hasn't been talked about quite as much, and maybe because there's just kind of an assumption that this is going to happen anyway in the next few years, is that super conferences, here we come. If we see the Arizona schools and Utah, meaning that all of the Four Corners schools will join the Big 12, and there will be a 16-team Big 12, and the Pac-12 leftovers are going to be, just, well, you have the Oregon, Washington, and Bay Area schools. That's going to be it. Then, like, those schools you'd think are going to splinter. Like, it's really hard to see Stanford and Cal, these huge academic institutions, just slumming with the Mountain West. And I would think, and let's remember that a year ago, when we were all studying the media rights valuations for schools, let's remember Stanford was valued by a former Fox Sports executive as being worth $15 million more than Oregon, $45 million to $30. And that was because the San Francisco Bay Area television market relative to the Eugene, Portland market. And so as much as the conversation has logically, reasonably flowed to Oregon and Washington and the Big Ten, which, in my mind is a very strong possibility if the Pac-12 does die, I wouldn't really bet against that happening. But I based on what I learned, based on what I've read, I would think that the Big Ten probably invites. Now, it might invite Stanford, Cal, Oregon, and Washington all at once. That's a possibility, not to be written off. But I would think that if you're going to look at Oregon and Washington here, Stanford and Cal here, I would say that the Big Ten is more likely to invite Stanford and Cal first than Oregon and Washington. And I mean, we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, the Pac-12 has to die first. We have to get the worst case scenario of all the Four Corner schools collectively going to the Big 12. But I think Stanford and Cal probably get the invite from the Big 10 first, and then Oregon and Washington. I'm not saying that Oregon and Washington are going to be left out, only that Stanford and Cal, because of the academic prestige, because of the Bay Area television markets, a lot of the things that USC brought to the table with the Big Ten, but of course, the extremely robust football brand, as the centerpiece of it all. But I would say that Stanford and Cal probably get the Big Ten invitation before Oregon and Washington do, but that could be immaterial if, we just get a super conference landscape where, if the Pac-12 does die, like, you don't have Power Fives anymore. It's just four conferences. And then that invites the possibility of mergers or fusions with the ACC, and then maybe the SEC and Big 12 because you have ESPN and Disney there. So Fox would consolidate the Big 10 and those incoming schools from the Pac-12, and then you get some Big 12 SEC consolidation. It's going to be interesting how that all shakes out. But I do think that if you get all of the Four Corners schools leaving for the Big 12, the Stanford, Cal, Oregon, and Washington are not going to merge with the Mountain West. I think if you do see the Pac-12 merge with the Mountain West, it's going to be with just Arizona leaving. If it's only Arizona that leaves and ASU and Utah do want to stay in the Pac-12, then there's still some geographical balance to that conference. You still have the Phoenix market. You still have Utah's quality. And you can see Oregon and Washington and Stanford and Cal saying, we can deal with this. Like you do, and of course, the Pac-12 presidents, like they've resisted Boise State for a very long time. They don't see Boise State as having the academics, that exist at the level to belong in the Pac-12. But if Arizona State and Utah make the commitment to stay and they let Arizona go to the Big 12, and so you have a Pac-8, which let's remember that existed in 1977 before Arizona and Arizona State took the Pac-8 to the Pac-10. If it's the Pac-8, like Pac-6, six-pack, that means the conference is dead. But if you have a Pac-8 with ASU and Utah, making a commitment to stay, then you bring in the Mountain West, and like you could get, like the conference isn't going to be better than it was with USC. I'm not going to suggest that for even 1 second. But the point would be that with a 16 team or maybe 18 team assemblage of the what is the Pac-12 right now, and then what is the Mountain West, maybe you shave off a few schools and a few of those schools will go to the AAC or Conference USA. You might have some shaving at the bottom end of this. But if you have Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Cal, Utah, Arizona State, Oregon State, Washington State, and then the high-end schools in the Mountain West. So that includes San Diego State, Boise State, Air Force, and Fresno State as well. Yep, that's the other school you'd want to mention in there. Like that's a decent amount of inventory. Like you're not going to get a spectacular price point in terms of a media rights deal, but like if the Pac-12 is thinking about all of this, and if it's anticipating that Arizona is going to leave for the Big 12, it could be that George Kliavkoff is trying to make sure that Arizona State and Utah stick around, and that Fresno State, Boise State, Air Force, and San Diego State are all included in the conference. You get some decent inventory. Like you're not going to get, I mean, so your lower end games are not going to be, stink bombs. Your lower end games are still going to be somewhat interesting. You're still going to have some semblance of balance. You're going to get games that people will be interested in watching. So that's a possible scenario for a Pac-12 Mountain West merger. So like it probably wouldn't be a full-on merger. You would see the lower end of the Mountain West, go elsewhere for football, I would think. Maybe the lower end of the Mountain West is able to stay for basketball or other sports, but you'd probably see some trimming of the fat for football, and you'd have a 14 to 16 team Pacific West, Mountain Pacific, who knows? But so just to summarize, if all the Four Corners schools go, then Pac-12 dies. We're headed to super conferences much sooner than we anticipated. But if Arizona State and Utah do not follow the University of Arizona out the door, then I think we should consider a Pac-12 Mountain West merger as a significant possibility.
So, Matt, you took this in a direction that I took it. My mind's a blur now because I've been on constantly in the last few days doing these shows about realignment. People can't get enough of it. We did one last night, Matt. I went live at 1 a.m. and stayed on till 4 something in the morning. And shoot, there were 380 people watching. So, um, but I kind of sized it up the way you just did in regards to, and what I would be interested in seeing is where the teetering point is, excuse me, with obviously the Pac 12 is the much superior conference to the Mountain West. But if there is further splintering, does there come a point where, yeah, it's not the Pac 12 taking the best of the Mountain West? It's either a merger of sorts, as you outlined, or it's actually the Mountain West saying, there's only two of you left, Oregon State and Washington State, let's say, you're joining us. We're not joining you any longer. So they're kind
That's
of three
definitely a
different
plot
versions
point.
of that. There's a
Absolutely, that's
merger in the
definitely
middle, or there's a
yeah.
Pac-12 continuing to take from the Mountain West, or if it gets really bad, the Mountain West taking the final couple from the Pac-12 or the Pac.
And so the especially salient point to mention here is we've just gone through several weeks in which we wondered if the Pac-12 was going to pay San Diego State's exit penalty fee to the Mountain West. And San Diego State wanted to be part of the Pac-12. It basically said so to the world without saying as much. Like that letter didn't say we want to join the Pac-12. It says we want to explore how we can get out of the Mountain West. All right. So one would think, but like this is not to be a guarantee because what we logically think, the Pac-12 doesn't follow logic. All right, it doesn't follow linear logic. But in a logical world, one would think that George Kliavkoff and Gloria Nevarez, the commissioner of the Mountain West, have had some discussions about how do we carry this thing forward. Can there be some horse trading regarding our conferences, San Diego State, in terms of who owes whom, in terms of fees, what we can negotiate. So if a merger is being discussed, that the whole San Diego State issue gives both the Pac-12 and the Mountain West things to think about in terms of revenue, in terms of budgets for their member schools, in terms of what kind of horse trading can be done. And it's kind of ironic that we're doing this right before the Major League Baseball trade deadline. Are we going to have like a big, the Pac-12 trades 4 Mountain West schools for Oregon State and Washington State and a future pick right before the Major League Baseball trade deadline? I mean, what kind of deals are going to be announced tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern time? I mean, could we have like these big trains crossing at the same time in terms of Major League Baseball and Pac-12 Mountain West mergers or anything else like that? It could get awful hilarious. The possibilities are wild.
Dependent Fanatic is asking how large the Big Ten could be. Well, I produced a video just days after USC and UCLA, and it was a Big 20. And I had Oregon, Washington, Stanford, and Cal joining the contingent from the West Coast as a Big 20 of sorts.
That's totally realistic, Dependent Fanatic and Mark, like that. Like if the Big Ten added those 4 schools shortly after the Pac-12 dies, like that would make complete sense to me. And I think if the Pac-12 dies, I reiterate that I think we're going to see super conferences explode right in front of us. That this thing that, a lot of people have felt it's going to happen eventually. It's going to happen eventually, but we certainly didn't seem to be on the track towards super conferences anytime soon, anytime in the next 2-3 years. But this Colorado mess and the dominoes that might soon fall as a result of it, well, we could be at the super conference junction sooner than anyone had anticipated. So the Big 20 with the Bay Area schools, Oregon and Washington, very realistic if the Pac-12 dies. Absolutely.
The Big Ten seems to suddenly have an upper hand on the SEC in this way. I am not discounting that anything could happen. We've got a Big Ten conference that stretches from Los Angeles to New York City. So there's nothing off the board at this point. but I don't know that a lot of people find it reasonable or that it could happen that the SEC would grab Oregon and Washington, let's say.
Yeah.
We're hearing in recent days, of course, Florida State's been the initiator. They've been out front of this talk on the other side of the country with, hey, since the day Mike Alford took over as the athletic director, hey, I'm hiring lawyers and consulting firms and research committees to figure out the grant of rights and how do we get out of it and how much is this costing us and all of that. And he's been very upfront about it. And there's another board of trustees meeting coming up very soon there at Florida State. That it appears as though the Big Ten, though, has two directions where they can go. They can go west and they can go southeast, where it appears as though if the Big Ten would somehow keep some or take some of those southeastern schools, meaning Clemson, Florida State, Miami's, all three of them or two or even one, that's the only direction that you would think the SEC is going to go for more football brands. Not that they couldn't get North Carolina or Georgia Tech but that's not going to add football value to the SEC. If the SEC allows that to happen, we're hearing Florida State to the Big Ten, Florida State Miami, or Florida State Clemson to the Big Ten. Wow, that would be really bring the Big Ten to the top.
It sure would be. And I have to duck in that, Miami to the SEC has become a reality this week. But it's not the conference. It's the Securities and Exchange Commission looking into the Hurricanes NIL deal. So had to get in that Miami SEC
Nice
joke. But that would be a seismic development if you saw Florida State and or Miami go to the Big Ten. That would be another, because that would be a geography busting move akin to UCLA and USC going to the Big Ten as well. Got to pull this comment up from Jeffrey Thompson. Now, would this be a hilarious outcome or what? The Big Ten expands to 20 with Oregon, Washington, Stanford, and Cal. We can have the Big Ten and the Pac-10 back, and we can get our Rose Bowl back. After all of this, that would be simply spectacular, and it would be the obvious way to divide up your 20 Big Ten teams. Would you even call it the Big Ten anymore? You could have what would you the Transcontinental 20, and then you have your Big Ten and your Pac-10 as your halves.
I don't think the Big Ten's giving up on that.
That'd be an absolutely hilarious outcome if the Big Ten and Pac-10 could come back into existence and have a Rose Bowl tie-in. Oh my God, that's just amazing, Jeffrey Thompson.
Should I really put a negative spin on that?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm not seeing the split 10 and 10. I'm seeing 14 or in the Midwest or in the East. You'd have to mix up the divisions.
You don't have four. I mean, you would have 6 teams on the West Coast with the Bay Area.
And you'd have to have some kind of quadrant.
And Oregon, Washington. Yeah. So it's not an even split, but then you would fold your westernmost teams, Nebraska, Iowa, probably also Wisconsin, maybe Illinois. Yeah. But I mean, branding, just the branding would be irresistible. And it would certainly create the idea of, if you had like your Pac-10 and your Big Ten in a larger Big 20, that would certainly create the impetus to play your conference championship game at the Rose Bowl, at least on a rotating basis. Like maybe one year you do it at Lucas Oil, where you were for Big Ten Media Days, and one year at in Pasadena. So, I mean, we can kick around these realignment scenarios a lot more. I know, Mark, you've had a very, very long day at the Voice of College Football.